Hi, folks. Steve Urban here. Today's episode of the Riderflex podcast is sponsored by Marketing 360. My good friend JB Kellogg and his team do such a fantastic job for us and so many other companies. Marketing 360 is the number one platform for small business, and it's everything you need to grow your business. If you need marketing support, I really encourage you to contact them at marketing360.com/Riderflex, and we'll add that link to the description of this episode for easy reference. And on today's episode of the Riderflex podcast, we had Mike Hopkins on the show again. Mike is the CEO of Bakken Midstream. He also sits on the board of many other companies. He's a longtime CEO. We had a great conversation today about so many things. What makes a great CEO, what makes a good board member, oil prices, the coronavirus, etc. Really great conversation. I enjoyed it, and I think you will too. Mike Hopkins on the Riderflex podcast today. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on again, Steve.
You're hanging in there. I know by the way, for the listeners, we're recording this right in the middle of the coronavirus. So if you're listening to this a year from now, by the way, it's March 24th, 2020, right in the middle of this mess. So thought I'd throw that out there for the listeners right away, in case they're listening in a year from now. But anyway, are you in Santa Barbara? Where are you at today?
I am on my ranch, which is outside of Santa Barbara in Santa Ynez, and I'm perfectly fine, Steve. And I live on a ranch, so a ranch kind of by definition, you're socially distanced, you're physically distanced, and because in the best of times, a lot of things that you want are inconvenient, you tend to stockpile. So without being a prepper, that's just kind of the lifestyle. So
right.
Personally, it's had nowhere near the impact that it's had on, I think, the vast majority of people. But I am well aware, personally aware from friends, family, that, for the general public, including people I know, this has been extraordinarily disruptive and extraordinarily frightening. I think I'm in the same boat as everyone else. I've never seen anything even remotely like this in my life. And I can go through various crises, disruptions in the market, nothing like this. Almost science fiction like, right?
Right. It really is. I'm at the age of 52 even. Both of my sons are in their mid to late 20s, and they're calling me for a little bit of advice. And of course, I'm giving them all the advice I can, but at the same time, I'm saying, by the way, this is new for me too. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, I've seen the old movies, about the stock market crash and the depression, and I've watched those movies, but I can't relate to anything like this. Never seen anything like it before. What's your take on the virus itself, the virus situation? What's your thought on it, and what do you see happening from here?
I have very little to say about it from a medical or scientific perspective because that's not my background. Yeah. I just know what people that I trust that are knowledgeable say, which is whether it happens or not, it's prudent, makes sense to me, Steve, to plan that it's not days, it's not weeks, it's months. And I think at the very minimum, it's safe to plan from a business perspective that the impacts of the coronavirus, whether it's still around as an immediate, growing, present threat, 3 or 4 months from now, whether that's the case or not, I don't know. But even if it's not the case, even if, hopefully, I think we all pray this is the case, if it is dissipating or gone within the next few months, I think it's hard to even imagine a situation in which there will not be continuing severe economic impacts and impacts on every single business, big or small. And realistically, my time horizon would be 12 months plus. That's going to be the case. I can't imagine a world in which it's just like that never happened.
Right.
For some,
right.
Yeah. and so I'm, right now, and personally in the businesses I'm involved in, we've been very focused on kind of taking in what's happened, processing what it means to our business, where there's direct impacts, understanding that. And I'd say very much so thinking about, since in none of these cases am I on the front lines of fighting the coronavirus, I'm more focused on, well, what can we do positive in business? Are there opportunities to not just advance what we were doing, but actually accelerate or pursue in new ways what we were doing? And that's been my focus, Steve. At the same time that I've observed and certainly read about some business that I think, unfortunately, maybe it's of necessity, but I'm not convinced of that they've processed what's happened and their reaction is complete retrenchment, going into a bunker.
Right.
And given what I said earlier about, I just see this going on not days or weeks or months, but longer term. I don't see how that works.
I agree.
As a strategy.
I agree. I mean, sticking your head in the sand and doing nothing. And, I don't think that's the answer either. I agree. And I think every small business owner across the globe over the last couple of weeks has definitely, okay, let's figure out an emergency cash flow plan. Let's cut some expenses. Let's do some necessary things, but you can't just stop being active on the other parts of your business. Perfect example of that, Scott and I here at Riderflex, my partner Scott, I mean, we went through our same thing, right? Looked at expenses. Okay, here's how much cash we have. This is that. But then we got up the very next day and we kept marketing, we kept selling, we kept doing all the other stuff too. You can't just, like you said, you can't just bury your head in the sand. I think that's the wrong answer for sure.
Yeah, and I think in your industry, Steve, my assumption would be that you've seen a sudden halt to many or all hiring plans, just because I've seen that myself. Even in very aggressive businesses, there's a pause, right, where everyone's saying, let's just stop everything to assess and plan for the future. But my projection would be that there's going to be some very significant hiring that gets implemented, certainly by the companies I'm involved in, but I think much more broadly. I think about the whole clean tech space. Right. And to me, at least where I live in California, I do not see, even if there is a severe general economic slowdown, even if we're going into a recession, which probably would be my bet, here in California, if you're in the clean tech industry, I don't see California from a policy perspective retrenching, backtracking. I bet a lot of money that it'll be the opposite. It'll be a doubling down. Agreed. It'll be a part of the response to a slowdown to unemployment will be, let's bet on renewables, let's bet on energy storage, let's bet on things that are very job intensive when we need to get people back to work, and at the same time do good for the environment.
That's right. And for a lot of folks too, you can pivot where you need to. I mean, Riderflex, for example, is a recruiting firm, but we also have candidate services. And guess what? There's going to be a lot of candidates that need resume writing, LinkedIn profile updates. We also have consultants on staff for crisis management and turnaround. I mean, you just have to look at your business, I think, and make decisions that yes, cut expenses, but you might have to pivot in some areas that you weren't planning on, or you might have to focus on some areas that you weren't planning on. I would say within days of the stuff happening, we were changing verbiage on our website to call out, candidate services and consulting more than we were recruiting. I mean, that's just one example in my little tiny world that I think so many other companies can do with various things. So I think it's important to stay positive, wake up, keep charging forward, stay active. Don't just bury your head in the sand. I totally agree. How'd you like to be the president of the United States right now, trying to balance, safety versus the economy crashing?
Well, I guess I'd say, Steve, I have never and never intend to want to be the president of the United States, coronavirus or not.
Especially not right now.
That said, no, especially right now because, it's, that good point to bring perspective to this. I look at the world just in terms of my personal life with my wife here at home and in my business life. It's relatively simple, very simple compared to if you actually had responsibility for the whole country and you had to deal with actually fighting coronavirus, which I don't. If you had to deal with actually dealing with the market disruptions, commodity disruptions, if you had to think about things like social unrest, historic unemployment. Yeah, it's a bit overwhelming. So no, I guess if I was drafted, I would do what I could. But this will be an amazing test, especially when I think of the fact that we've been for quite some time extremely partisan. That's been a kind of a new thing to me, to go back in time a little bit. I'm Canadian and became a dual citizen, but one of the things, Steve, that really struck me when I actually moved to the United States and became an American and participated in political life was the extremes of partisanship politically. Right. And that, I'd say until at least very recently, I've just seen that kind of get worse and worse, like unbelievably to me, because I thought, wow, like years ago that was bad and it's just gotten worse.
Yep.
Maybe, to try to look on the positive, maybe the severity of what's happening and the degree to which this is like literally an existential threat to people's lives and to the economy, maybe that actually brings people together and they kind of temporarily, at least, put some politics aside.
Maybe so.
I don't know.
Maybe so.
Maybe.
I would hate to have the job. I think it's at first, I think it was all about the safety and health. And I think the more days that go by, it becomes balancing health and keeping everything from just spinning out of control from a market perspective and from an unemployment perspective. I think there's going to be this weird balance. At least that's my opinion on it. I'm not an expert, but I would just think that at some point you're like, damn, okay, I want to protect people, but I also don't want 50% unemployment and, people looting in the streets. So you got to balance it.
Well, I guess this comes back to why I think any business that can adapt and actually grow and create jobs in this environment is doing everything that they possibly can to contribute and make this better and mitigate this kind of unfolding disaster, because the reality is it's a minuscule percentage of us that can actually fight the virus.
Right.
But I think it's a relatively large number of us that can help with the economy, and that's a plenty big enough challenge, given that
Agreed.
There's whole sectors of the economy, and this is obvious to everyone, there's whole sectors of the economy that are simply stopped. If you're in the airline industry, there's whole sectors, and there isn't going to be any, there may be financial bailouts, but it's not like those industries can be turned around right now, because nobody's going to fly. Full stop, not at the time being. But all kinds of other sectors that these can be advanced even in this environment. And I think that's where I try to keep my head. It keeps you
and stay
healthy,
positive.
positive.
Yep. I think I agree. Another positive spin on that is, if you are a small business owner, let's use the bar owner or the restaurant owner, for example, right? I really just emotionally, I feel for these guys, because you and I both know most restaurant and bar owners, these guys are not just flush with, 12 months worth of cash just sitting on the side somewhere. These guys are living, week to week. The margins aren't super great. It's a tough business to begin with. And then all of a sudden, you just told that you can't open the doors. I can't even imagine what some of those small business owners are going through right now. But I would, to your point, on a positive note, if they can figure out a way to get through it, they're going to learn a ton. They're going to come out of it stronger. They're probably going to come out of it in a less competitive environment because some of their buddies down the street aren't going to make it. And so if they could just hang in there, man, I feel for them. I really do. One more positive slant on the whole thing. I heard somebody say this the other day, a friend of mine. I grew up in Oklahoma, so I got a lot of Oklahoma and Texas friends. And I lived in Texas for a long time. Needless to say, I know a lot of people with guns. Anyway, I heard this guy called me the other day and he goes, hey, did you hear they're going to shut down the liquor stores? And I said, well, I kind of saw something a little bit in the news, maybe. I don't know. Is that true? And he goes, can you imagine? You're going to tell Jim Bob down in Tyler, Texas, that he can't go to work. And then he gets laid off. Then he's got no money in his bank account. And then you're also going to tell him that he can't go down and get a 6-pack of beer. He said, can you imagine what that's going to do to people? And I said, yeah, no, that won't be good.
No, well, it's been interesting to me, Steve. You talked about little restaurateurs and liquor stores. It's been interesting to me how, in such a short period of time, the very little pleasures in life have become so important.
Yes.
And there's a restaurant in my little community. So many restaurants and pretty much all the stores in my local community, they just closed. They have closed, but there are small restaurants, larger restaurants that, well, one of them that I'll highlight, I think like within, I don't know, 24 hours or 48 hours of the order in California to close down, unless you are a takeout or pickup place.
Yeah.
They were not that, and they completely converted themselves into they went with a pickup. They made barbecue. They advertised it.
There you go.
They would come outside, and we went and did it. There was a lineup of cars, everybody properly distanced. This is a restaurant where everyone trusts them to be careful. Yeah. They did gloves. The chef personally came out and handed the food. It was a full barbecue dinner. And
great story.
I don't know that it was
great story.
I don't know that it was the best barbecue I've ever had, but that night it sure tasted like the best
barbecue. It is true how I think we forget that it was really, it wasn't that long ago, Mike, when people lived a truly hard life. We have forgotten quickly. Just think about 150 years ago, which was not that long ago when you think about the life of the planet. People lived a completely different life, and we are so spoiled right now. Oh my God. We got it good, bro. I hope it, I need those comforts. I personally need those comforts. Tell me about, I know you're in the oil business, right? At Bakken Midstream. Why don't you give us a quick overview, by the way, of Bakken Midstream, and then roll that into what is going on with the oil prices and what are your thoughts there? Because they started dropping even before all this madness. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. You know a lot more about that than me, but anyway, give us an overview and then talk to us about the oil prices, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, there was an oil war that was started by Saudi Arabia when there was a coronavirus, but it was nothing, Steve, like it's unfolded into. So it was not looking anywhere near as severe as it's turned out to be. Okay. And this was prior to the stock markets really, taking a dive. Mm-hmm. So at Bakken Midstream, we are not directly in the oil business. We are in North Dakota, or at least we are doing projects in North Dakota, which deal with the natural gas that is associated with their oil. And in North Dakota, all of their oil has associated natural gas and not just gas in their oil stream, but a high quantity of natural gas. And in the natural gas, it's a high quantity of natural gas liquids. And the issue in North Dakota with their associated gas and the high quantity of liquids in their gas is that historically, and this is largely still the case, they have not been focused on any of that. They have been focused on the production of oil, which is a relatively new thing in the state. Okay. It's growing very quickly. It's made them the #2 oil producer in the state. However, the natural gas has been a problem. The natural gas requires, and so do the liquids, require infrastructure that oil does not require. And it's infrastructure that you can't put in place quickly. So it's large, capital-intensive infrastructure that requires years of planning, which frankly did. So the consequence was, and this is, I think, something that's well known now, even outside of North Dakota, is there is an extraordinary amount of flaring of natural gas and the liquids in the gas, simply because there's nowhere for it to go. And if you want the oil, the gas comes out, and if you have no place for it, no utilization of it, you flare it.
And flaring,
obviously.
Flaring for the listeners, yeah, go ahead. Maybe for the folks that don't know, go ahead. Yep.
So flaring is literally, lighting that natural gas and the liquids in the natural gas on fire at the wellhead. If you've been in a place where there is flaring, if you're at that location, it looks like either a small, or it can be an extremely large flame that's there.
Right.
And it's constant. It's going 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about quite extraordinary volumes. It's in the order of, I'd say well over $1 billion in natural gas that's being flared. And
wow.
Yeah, that's in the value of it. And that's the value of it. The pollution obviously is bad. Mm-hmm. And also there's physical limits to how much you can flare. And ultimately, not utilizing gas productively, not utilizing liquids productively. If you're getting them anyways, not utilizing them threatens the oil production. At a certain point, you just have to crank that back. That's the only way to deal with it. So our company, while we're certainly not an oil company and we're not directly involved in oil in any respect, what we're doing, and we're actively doing it, Steve, is to, as quickly as possible, develop the infrastructure, develop the projects that actually would capture that gas that otherwise would be flared, that put it to productive use, whether we're talking about, well, we can be talking about anything. Natural gas is used for, and liquids are used for everything, including everything we use in daily life. It can be heating, it can be plastics, it can be fertilizers, it can be power. The one thing you don't want it to be is nothing. You don't want to just do nothing with it when it's a tremendous resource. And to bring us back to the present, I'd say that, as I said, although we're not in the oil business, the fact that oil prices have collapsed as severely as they have, I think an impact of that will be that the oil producers that we work with are going to be more focused on getting value, where before the value of the oil was so significant and so overwhelming relative to the natural gas. When you say, well, the oil's worth half, maybe, or less than half of what it was, then yes, the natural gas becomes much more significant. And if you think, Steve, in terms of one immediate consequence, no matter what business you're in, is I think everybody is way more focused on all their costs, all their revenues, doesn't have the luxury to say, that's not that important.
Right.
I think, so we're seeing that in my business, that we have the attention more than we used to of producers that are saying, I need to pay attention to everything. And so there you go. There's a positive impact of this disruption, is that you would like, and this is the philosophy of Bakken Midstream, you would like the value, regardless of your views on fossil fuels, clean tech, renewables, to the extent that we are using fossil fuels, which we obviously are all over the place, and we continue to use the products of fossil fuels in our everyday life, as long as we're doing that, you at least good stewards of those resources, make the most, mitigate the environmental damage done by them, maximize the value. It's two things. You want to both mitigate the environmental impact, because there is an environmental impact, and maximize the value. And I'd say that's something that just hasn't been done the way it could have been done. And now there seems to be the impetus, and I'm, in that narrow way, I'm happy about that, the impetus to do those kind of things, mitigate the environmental impact, maximize the value. That's good for everybody.
Yeah, that is. Yep. What, do me a favor for just a regular guy like me, layman's terms, what causes the oil prices to jump up and down like they do? Maybe you can answer that question from, just talking to a commoner. All we know is like, oh, wow. Okay. I guess the price of oil per barrel is $28 this week. I don't know what that means or how they got there or how they decided that, but okay. Educate us on what's causing that. What caused this recent dip, if you don't mind?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you what I know. I'm certainly not an oil pricing expert, although I've been in the energy, including oil and gas industry, much of my career. I'd start with saying, it's fundamentally like any other commodity. It's a function of supply and demand. Supply and demand drives price. It has been skewed in the case of oil by having had a cartel, OPEC, for a long time now. Pretty much almost all my career in the industry, there's been a cartel that has artificially adjusted supply, constrained supply, in order to get the pricing they want. Sometimes that's been to move the price up. Sometimes that's actually been to move the price down. And in the case, most recently, Saudi Arabia, it's a member of OPEC, obviously, but independently from OPEC, it decided to just recently effectively declare an oil price war by saying, we're going to produce as much as we can, we're going to discount aggressively, and we're going to drive down the price of oil. And that would be, I'd say, an obvious example of, I'd say, an artificial influence on the market. You're not just behaving in a normal way. You're not producing what's optimal from a technical perspective. They've just chosen to use their tremendous oil resources to just drive down the price and take advantage of the fact that their cost of oil production continues to be pretty much the lowest in the world. And there's people, and this is where, I don't know what to believe. There's people in the world that believe that was targeted principally at our U.S. oil producers, principally shale producers, who have relatively high cost. Okay. And so when oil was north of $50, U.S. shale producers were doing very well. It was well above their cost of production. When oil is 20 or less, for most shale producers, you're losing money by producing. And if that continues, you could see shale producers, you've already seen their stock prices just get completely hammered, more so than the stock market generally. It's even worse than the general stock market crash. There's people that think this is more directed at Russia, who's so, unlike the United States, where we're not that dependent at all on the oil prices and oil production. It's nice that we have it, but it's not like it's our lifeblood. For Russia, that's kind of how they operate. They operate on oil revenues. So does Saudi Arabia, by the way. So, in this case, I don't know who's trying to, who is the real target of what Saudi Arabia did, but that is definitely what they did. They made a decision to drive down oil as low as possible and take market share and put financial pressure on other countries. US would be one, Russia would be another, but really all producers are affected by this. And then I guess the last comment I'd make, which does go to price, is that not long ago, people talked about peak oil. I don't know if you ever heard that term, but it used to be like it was in the news, and people would write about the fact that I'm going to say this was like 10 years ago, when people were saying, analysts were saying, and prognosticators were saying that we have reached a point in our history where we've pretty much found all the oil there is. And we are going to be in serious trouble unless we reduce our demand for oil. We could be in a case of economic collapse, or oil prices are going to be $500 a barrel because there's simply no more oil. And what oil there is left, even see what's left, is going to be so expensive to extract. Like, let's say it's in the Arctic, that you're not going to be able to buy that at 20 or 50 or 100 barrels. It'll be multiples of that. And I'd say the interesting thing that's happened, and it goes to price, is technology, especially here in the United States. Technology has found oil that had not previously been discovered in very large quantities, not just in the United States, but around the world, but especially here in the United States. And in addition to finding oil that hadn't been previously discovered, maybe more significantly, they have come up with technologies that allow them to extract more of what they've already found or discovered around the world. And so I don't think anyone these days talks about peak oil, because it's been completely disproven that years ago we hit the limit. We continue to find oil. We continue to get better at extracting what we need, to the point where I'd say, before we run out of oil, we will have completely transitioned from oil to renewables, to other forms of energy. And oil will be, you may still need oil and natural gas, and you probably will, for things like plastics and other things that we use. But as an example, you won't need it for your car. There'll be many, many things where that utilization will be considered very old-fashioned, very unnecessary, very inefficient, and we'll have better ways to do it. So I'm going to, again, hit an optimistic note that whereas we used to worry about running out of oil, I don't spend any time worrying about running out of oil, because I don't think in the relevant time we'll run out of oil. It'll be abundant until we don't need it anymore.
Yep. I see the same thing. I totally agree. Yep. I completely agree. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with me on that. I've always been fascinated, and it's interesting. My dad was in the oil business in Oklahoma his whole life, but not really at the super high executive level. And so I grew up with it in the late 70s, when there were oil rigs all over the place. I mean, you'd drive down the country road in Oklahoma, and they were like Christmas trees. They were everywhere. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts with me. A couple more things. I know I've already kept you on the phone a bunch, and I appreciate your insight on some of this stuff. You've been a CEO for a long time now. I always enjoy getting your thoughts on and your wisdom on what you've learned so far. What advice for the listeners would you give on, being a great CEO? What do you think makes a great CEO? And then maybe you could spin that into even some tips on first-time younger CEOs, if you don't mind talking just a little bit about that.
Sure. I'd probably start, Steve, by saying that, at least from my personal experience as a CEO, being successful as a CEO really starts with being able to attract, develop, and lead a team. I think that, and I have seen this, people that try to do everything, they don't try to do everything. If they try to micromanage what others do, I've literally never seen that work. I'm
Right.
sure there is a business in which you can stand over someone's shoulder and, figuratively beat them with a stick. But I'm not in that world, and I've never seen that. In my world, which is more startups and tech, where I've been successful, where I've seen others being successful, it starts with that attracting a team. And I think attracting a team, there's a few elements to that. One element of it is, I don't think you can attract a team of any kind, or at least you can't attract the right team, unless you have the ability to distill down what it is you want to do in simple terms, and to be able to communicate that, Steve, in a passionate and compelling way. To me, that's what will allow you to start attracting a team and building a team. It's your personal ability to understand the business that you want to pursue, distill it down to simple terms, to be able to communicate it in simple terms, and to demonstrate in how you communicate your passion for it. That, I see that as attracting the right team members. In the same way, by the way, your first investor, your next investor,
right.
To me, that's a litmus test that every investor I know has, is can the CEO distill down what they're doing into the simplest of terms, make that compelling that it's going to work, and demonstrate in how they communicate their passion for it. And the more you can, the more you can bring people like that to the table around you, the more compelling that is to investors. It's one thing to say, I'm Mike Hopkins, I figured out this business, I can distill it down into a sentence, I can communicate it with passion, but I can't attract anyone else. Well, no one wants to invest in that because there's very severe physical limits to what I can do. But really good, I have had success, and I certainly am proud of the fact I've had success in developing teams. And then from there, once you've got your team around you, once you've got the message down and everybody is sort of singing from the same songbook, then I think, and this is, in my opinion, extraordinarily important to being successful and to being able to scale. You've got to have team members that are wired to be independent, accountable, like they want authority, they want responsibility. Yes, great team members, but to me, if you want to be in tech, if you want to scale quickly, you just need that. You need people that they get the vision, they totally understand it, they're responsible for this area, and they go and they build their own team and they integrate it with the other teams, but they are running that thing like they're a CEO themselves in their area. And that's when I've put together companies, when I've hired people, it's what I always have in mind. Whether you're talking about your C team, the C-level people, or you're talking about your middle management, to me, it goes throughout the whole organization. You want a team of people that they want authority. They want, I'd love to have the bookkeeper give us great ideas organizationally about how to run the company from their perspective, and feel like they're that integrated. But obviously, they're not under my management. I wouldn't want that. If you have the right people, you can trust them to, run with it.
You mentioned on their last podcast, you said, I can't remember the exact words, but you said something to the effect of, I like to recruit little mini CEOs, people that think like a CEO, and then let them run divisions and departments. I think you said that, almost the exact thing. Yeah, that's really good stuff, Mike. Thank you for sharing that. Really good. Can I ask you, I know we're almost out of time. What if we go just a few minutes over this 12:30 Pacific? How much time do I have? Can I hit you with another one?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're good. Yep.
You've been a board member too, lots of different boards, been a board member for a long time, currently on some boards. So you have a lot of experience there. I recently did a podcast interview with a great lady who trains people to be on boards. I thought that was a fascinating interview. Just curious, what kind of advice would you give to people that are joining their first board as a board member? What kind of advice would you give them, and on how to be a good board member? Talk about that a little bit, because I'm guessing you've seen good ones and bad ones.
I have. I've seen good ones and bad ones my whole career, including going back, Steve, to when I was an attorney in a very large law firm, and I had the benefit of observing many boards from Fortune 100s through startups and all the different kinds of people. And now I see it more hands-on, where I'm on boards and I'm working with board members. So yeah. So I guess I start with, as a board member on any kind of company, or not-for-profit for that matter, the most basic is there's a legal responsibility that you have as a board member, which you have to fulfill, full stop. That's the starting point of any board member. And if you're not cognizant of that, and by that I mean like all the time when you're a board member, in every board meeting, in preparation for a board meeting, that's the basic, that's the minimum. But sometimes, and obviously that is not adhered to. Sometimes board members fail to meet their legal fiduciary responsibility. They don't prepare. They observe or hear things happen that are not right, and they don't speak out, and they don't do their job as a board member. That's the minimum. But I just bring it up because I have seen people not do the minimum. Next thing I'd say is, unfortunately, I think a lot of board members, Steve, that's all they do. To their credit, they do that, but that's all they do. They view being a board member as sort of simply a legal responsibility and not much more. And if they do more, a lot of them will do, well, I'll say bluntly, they'll pontificate. They will, give the company the benefit of their tremendous wisdom. But they will, in these kinds of people, which are not, this is not a small minority. I'd say there's a lot of board members that are like that. I thankfully am not involved on boards that have such people at this time, but I've had that in the past, where that's the mode they're in. Management is trying to run a company. Yep. Management is trying to do great things. And sometimes management is trying to deal with a crisis. And when you have a board that has people on it that are not really coming down to your level of dealing with your reality, but want to tell you about how it was when they were running this company, or how it was when they were doing this. Right. And saying, you should watch out for the bottom line. And sure, I think it's a shame. And it's obviously very frustrating if you're a CEO, if you're the management team, and you've got what should be a great resource, and instead it's more of a burden. And I put those kind of boards into that category. Those boards, to me, are more of a burden on management than they are a benefit to management.
Bingo. Couldn't agree more. So, could not agree more.
If I turn to what you should do, or what I advocate and what I try to do myself, is of course you do what you're supposed to do legally, but beyond that, I think, and especially in my world of startups, I believe every member of the board should be on the board for a very specific purpose beyond that minimum requirement.
That's a good reminder.
And they should be there. And this is, I think management should think about this. Investors should think about this when they're searching for board members. I think most do, but not all. Think about what specifically are you trying to have on your board? If you have a 5-member board, don't have 5 finance people. Even if you're in the finance industry, don't have 5 finance people.
Great point.
Think about what you need. It may have to do with what your business is. It may have to do with your management team. You may at that moment either have some holes in management, Or you may be thinking, look, we'd like to have a CFO, but we're not at that stage yet where we should have a full-time CFO. So maybe you have a CFO qualified person on your board. So you get them as a benefit as a board member. When I think of it that way, thinking about a board as, it's what I'm saying, Steve, is in the startup world, I think of boards as like extensions of management. Yes, there are important times, this goes back to the legal responsibility, when as a board member, you are performing a governance role. Right. Most of the time, I would hope, and this is what I try to do, most of the time, you are an extension of management. You are helping management. And you do things that might otherwise have been done by management. You are out there promoting the company. You are connecting them with partners. You may literally be pitching deals on behalf of the company. You are a sounding board for the CEO. I certainly like to do that in my own companies where I'm on the board. I have encouraged and I enjoy being a sounding board, whether you want to call that a coach or whatever you want to call it. I enjoy having interaction with CEOs of companies that I'm on the board of that are not structured. They're not part of a board meeting. They are one-on-ones where whether it's a subject that comes up in between board meetings or it's just a subject you wouldn't bring up at a board because it's not a board topic, but it's important to the company or it's at least important to the CEO. And that's frankly fun. It's fun, Steve, to be able to give I'll say a young CEO the benefit of an older, more experienced CEO's advice. And it is definitely a two-way street. In what I'm involved in, even though I am asked for advice many times, I learn a lot even when I'm giving advice from the back and forth and because I don't know that anybody, and definitely I am not an all-knowing guru. So it's very much a give and take. And I think for me, that's usually what happens is people come to it for advice. You give advice, but I guess it goes back to don't pontificate. Have a conversation, talk it through, make sure you're understanding what is the problem this person's experiencing and what is their perspective. Because a lot of times you'll get to the best result if you have that more conversation as opposed to, hey, let me give you advice. I'll tell you how to do it.
By the way, awesome stuff right there. I just want to highlight a couple of things you just said. I ran as a CEO myself, I ran a couple of smaller companies, a couple of $40 million companies. And I can tell you that the best board member I ever had was the one you just described right there at the end. He was the one that I could call and just say, hey, can I just talk to you about this for a minute? Like just one-on-one. I could call him and say, what do you think about this? He was also a board member that when I got the quote board book ready for the board members and I would send it to him, a few days ahead of time before the board meeting, I knew he was actually going to read it. He was going to study it line by line. And I got to where I would set up a pre-call with him. And I would go to him and say, okay, can you just go ahead and tell me now, like some of the smaller stuff that I know you're going to hit me with before we get to the board meeting? Because I know you've read it. I mean, he was the best one that I could have those one-on-one conversations with. Now, by the way, he was also the toughest board member. He was also the one that was definitely going to say, well, why the hell did you do that? Stuff like that. But he's the one I valued. Great. He's the one I valued. I mean, some of the rest of them, like you said earlier, I swear, Mike, I mean, I would, how you personally know, and so do I, how much stress a CEO goes through preparing for a quarterly board meeting and the amount of work that goes into preparing the material. I have walked out of those meetings that sometimes going, I just killed myself for a week, 2 weeks to get ready for this meeting. And, 3 of these guys didn't even say anything. Like, what are they doing here?
Well, I totally get it and relate to it, Steve. I think sometimes being a CEO is usually it's a very privileged job, but sometimes it's a bit of a lonely job.
Oh,
and
you got that. You got that right.
When things are going well, everybody's your friend, everybody's easy to talk to, and it is easy to talk to when everyone's going well, whether you're talking to your board on up or you're talking to your own team. Mm-hmm. When things are not going well, and I mean, just thinking objectively about my whole career in startups, if we were like to add up every hour of every day that you were working on a startup, there's more in the category of things not going well
right.
than there is in the category of going well. And when it's not going well, I think that's when, it's even with a great team, I think it's natural for a CEO to be reluctant to 100% confide in team members.
Yes.
And I'm talking about if things are going bad, like extremely threatening,
right.
You want to protect people to some degree. So there's a reluctance that I think is natural to be completely sharing in very challenging times with your own team. And that's when you would like to have a board that helps. And boy, that's when it, I think, really hits home. When you've got the board that's the board of the pontificators, you are on your own.
I know, right?
You're not getting any help from them. But when you've got the board or the board member that you just described, that no matter what, good or bad times, you feel comfortable to just pick up the phone. It's not so much board member to board member, it's two people talking and get help. Whether it's just a sounding board or you really need advice, then it's during those challenging times that is so valuable. So if you did the work, if you had the good fortune to have board members like that, that's when you really benefit from it. Which, by the way, that's when you really need it, right?
That's when you really need it.
When everything's going great, a board is kind of nice to have, but
that brings us full circle. Great way to end the conversation is it brings us all the way back to the beginning of, and right now, if you're a CEO of a small to medium, if you're a CEO of any business this week, as we're recording this podcast, it is a very stressful time. And right now is, if you're listening to this episode, right now is when you realize, you need those, even if it's not a real board of directors, maybe it's an advisory board, or maybe it's just advisors or mentors, whatever they're called. Right now is when you want to be able to call and say, hey, listen, I got to make some drastic, super hard decisions in the next, 5 days. I just want to talk to somebody about it. Because to your point, being a CEO it can be a lonely thing on a regular good day. It can sure as hell be a lonely thing when you're going through what we're going through right now. So I encourage all listeners need to surround themselves with people they can call, good mentors, good advisors, good board members. It's so critical for your health, physically, mentally, emotionally as a CEO. So surround yourself with those people. Mike, I know you're super busy. I've already kept you way over our time, and I appreciate it, man. I love having you on the show. Thank you so much for all the advice and wisdom. I appreciate it, sir. Love that shirt, by the way.
Always a pleasure, Steve.
I love that shirt. You're looking good. You always look great. I mean, damn, how do you stay in such good shape? What are you running 5 miles every morning? I mean, holy cow! You just look great.
I start each morning reading or listening to a bit of Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, being present in the moment so that I've got perspective on everything. Comes in especially valuable when the world's falling apart, to have a little perspective on it. Physical fitness, very important to me too, Steve. Yeah. I think for anybody, but for me, I've just made it a practice that no matter what, I mean, literally no matter what, I'm going to exercise every day. Have done that for a lot of my life. I think it started with, I was extremely underweight, a weakling when I was in high school and college, and I decided I'm going to change that, and it served me well. I just feel so much better mentally and physically. And family, love my wife, like having personal time. No matter what's happening at work, make time for that. If you have all those things in place, for me, it allows me to be extremely focused, very intense, very productive in work, because those other things are looked after.
Yeah. Mike, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it. Great catching up with you, sir. Thank you. And
likewise.
We'll talk soon, okay?
Sounds great.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye. The Riderflex podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviews. Our show can be heard just about anywhere these days, but you can visit riderflex.com and click on the podcast page to hear all the previous episodes and learn more about the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Contact us at the email address info@riderflex.com or 888-964-5876. Thanks so much for listening, and if you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes.